Our headline today at BillMick.com are tickets and treason. Also on the show page there, linked up for you. You can connect to Dave Bowman and Dave Does History, that link in the paragraph there as we're telling you what's going on today's show. And as it does on a Tuesday, Dave Bowman brings us Dave Does History. This hour brought to you by Renewal by Anderson. Dave, we're going to go back to my native land today. I like where we're headed here. Tell me what's up.
Well, kind of. We are. We're actually going back into the grievances. And as Jefferson, as we noted last week, these aren't just complaints. These are reasonable, thought-through ideas that sometimes we read them today and we don't necessarily grasp the implication of. So we've reached this grievance. Here we go. He has endeavored, that is the king, has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, semicolon, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migration hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands, unquote. It is, and I got to caveat this by saying, look, this is not a discussion about immigration politically today. But it should be noted that immigration has always been an issue here in America. From the very beginning, it was a problem. Now, you're going to find that the issue in 1775 and 1776 was there wasn't enough of it. But the concern about it was pretty much the same concern that you have today. We'll get there as we go through this whole thing.
Also sounds to me like it's aimed at limiting growth and expansion.
Well, the complaint is that the king is limiting growth, and we don't like that. We, the American colonialists, want to grow. And it makes sense. I mean, think about this. We've just won the 7 Years' War. The size of colonial America has literally just almost tripled. So that's a lot of land. It's a lot of area. We need a lot of people, and we need a lot of movement amongst people that can start doing all this stuff. But Britain's frontier policy is going to directly threaten those economic interests, particularly of influential colonialists, and this is going to contribute every bit as much as the idea of taxation without representation will do. It's a major threat, this limitation that the king is putting on both immigration and expansion is going to, it's a huge deal. The idea in 1776, in the 18th century, is that liberty and independence are really deeply connected to the idea of being a landholder. And one of the great things about America, particularly compared to England, is that there's a lot of land out there, and it's cheap, and just about anybody can own it.
And we pick it up when we continue in 1 minute here on Bill Mick Live. You know, Dave, as I think about this, though, and not that I'm a fan of King George, but I can see from the monarch's perspective, we're expanding this land. It means additional troops. It means additional expense. I'm not sure we can handle this. I can see where he'd want to say, let's slow down a little bit, people.
In the wake of the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, Parliament looked at this and determined that it would take about 400,000 pounds per year to guard the new areas if Americans were allowed to just start moving into them, because it would mean conflict with the indigenous tribes, and it would mean potential further conflict with the French, and we would have to take this particular action. And of course, 400,000 pounds in 1770 money was way more than it is now. And they just didn't have it. There was no way. There is some logic to what the king had to say. There is some logic to the proclamation of 1763 in the wake of the war, which basically said, okay, you can go to the Appalachians, but no further. Now, this is a problem because, of course, Americans in general want to move west, Some founding fathers, like George Washington, have invested in land speculation west of the Appalachian Mountains. And remember, Washington's been over there, today being the anniversary of the day that he captured Fort Duquesne, which will become Pittsburgh. He's seen all this land. He knows what's out there. And many of the early colonialists have invested in this, and they want to do this. Now, Benjamin Franklin in the early 1770s is over in London, and he is pitching an idea to a guy by the name of Willis Hill. He's the Earl of Hillsborough, and he is in charge of colonial land type things. And so he pitches this idea to him that, hey, we need a 14th colony. And we're going to make this 14th colony in the trans-Appalachian area, which is an interesting name. Basically,
more interesting these days than it was then.
Yes, yeah, basically everything west of the Appalachian Mountains in what is then Virginia. Hillsborough is dead set against this. He thinks this is a terrible idea. And so he hits on a plan. And his plan is to trick Franklin into making his request for this unrealistic and unreasonable. And so he tells, Franklin wants 2 million acres in what is essentially West Virginia to become this new colony, which, by the way, they're going to call Vandalia. We're not going to go through all that right now, but the bottom line is Hillsborough tells Franklin, well, only 2 million? Reasoning that if he asks for even more, the request will look so ridiculous that the Privy Council will just throw it out. So Franklin calls his bluff and asks for 20 million acres instead. Okay, fine. We want 20 million acres. He also, at the same time, goes and says, we need some more speculators. We need some more investors in this. And he goes and gets a bunch of Fleet Street bankers, all of whom happen to hate Hillsborough. They don't like him. And so they start investing in this colony of Vandalia and this idea of expansion west in Virginia. And Franklin is just ecstatic about this. The Privy Council looks at it and says, you know what? We approve this. We recommend approval to the king. And, anything we recommend approval, the king's going to go along with. And so by 1770-ish, we are set to go with a 14th colony. And it's not Vermont. It's a place called Vandalia, which you will notice never comes to pass.
True.
Why doesn't it come to pass? Well, Hillsborough's pretty ticked off because Franklin went behind his back and got all these other bankers and stuff. So he actually resigns. And in the meantime, things get a little wonky. Of course, in 1770, we have the Boston Massacre. This is followed in 1773 by the Tea Party. And eventually, all these things are starting to add up. And then in 1774, you have the Quebec Act, which we've talked about in the past, which basically says, now Quebec extends down here to the Ohio River instead of where it was up on the St. Lawrence River. So basically, the king has given Quebec, the province of the colony of Quebec, Western Virginia, which essentially kills the idea of Vandalia. But of course, by June 1774, when this goes into effect, things have deteriorated to the point where we're not really worried anymore about the proposed colony of Vandalia. We're a little more busy with the idea of, maybe it's time for us to move on. This is the first complaint. Well, it's actually the last complaint in which he lists there, which is that he's raised conditions for the new appropriations of land. He has made it virtually impossible for us to gain new land in order to expand our colonies. He said we could, and then he took it away from us and gave it to those Quebecians, who are, what's that word for them? For those people?
French.
Oh, yeah, French. And not only are they French, but they're Catholics, which means that this king is, he's elevating French Catholics over the interests of British Anglicans, and that creates a lot of stress and a lot of conflict. And this in and of itself is probably as much of a problem for the colonialists as this taxation without representation. Now, not only are we being taxed, but we're being told that we have to confine ourselves to this little eastern seaboard area. One of the biggest issues of this age across the world is that England is way overcrowded, especially London. And most of the land outside of London is owned by individuals who own vast tracts. In fact, I was reading this week that the Crown still owes much of Lancashire, and there's no room to move. Well, here in America, you have room to move, but now the king has come out and said, "Thou shalt not," which is seen as a blow against liberty, and it's going to lead, well, it leads to this complaint that he's raised these conditions. But at the same time, he's also said, we're going to cut back on this immigration thing because we don't like those people moving over there either.
And we pick it up when we continue on Bill Mick Live. Dave Bowman with Dave Does History as only he can do, Tuesdays here on 92.7 FM WMMB.
This is Dave Does History on Bill Mick Live.
There we go. If I push that button, I get to talk. I'll push this one, Dave gets to talk. Renewal by Anderson, this hour's sponsor of the program. Nice to have you with us on a Tuesday on WMMB. And, of course, Mindy and the gang at Light Rock 99.3 bringing you all your Christmas favorites through the holidays. So enjoy that when you get an opportunity as well. So, Dave, you're talking about Vandalia here. I guess my native land could have ended up being called that instead of West by God, Virginia, had this colony idea taken hold and eventually statehood befallen the area. And West Virginians tend to hold on to a little bit of history here. There is still a Vandalia gathering every year in the capital.
And what do you do at this Vandalia gathering?
Kind of a street festival kind of thing, food and you know, music and entertainment, you know, Appalachian music and arts and all. And they have a liars contest. Basically, guys come together and they start spinning these tall tales. And my buddy Paul Lepp, God rest his soul, he died several years ago, he would win that liars contest, spinning some of the funniest stories you've ever heard. He was just very good at he'd have been a success in Hollywood is what he would have been. He'd have been a great writer.
So this liars contest, we're going to take a little bit of a detour here because this is, you know, it's interesting history and it applies to Bill. This whole liars contest, again, go back to that Declaration of Independence thing, this complaint where he's raised the conditions of new appropriations of lands. The king is limiting who can come here and all this kind of thing. This liars contest kind of traces itself back to that in a lot of ways. The Declaration says that he's endeavored to prevent the population of these states, which is kind of a strange sentence today because we don't see the population. We think of that as a noun where it's actually a verb. Yeah. He's preventing people from coming here. The settlers west of the Alleghenies, Bill's people, know exactly what they meant. Every time they pushed back or pushed across the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Crown would tighten the land policies, revoke charters, freeze grants, and it tried to corral them like a restless herd. Vandalia was supposed to legitimize settlement in what is now West Virginia, Kentucky, Western Pennsylvania, but instead the Board of Trade in London stalled. Parliament bickered about it. The Privy Council hesitated. And that proclamation line of 1763 kept the settlers, kept getting thrown in their face. To the men and the women living there, it felt like London was dangling a shiny new colony in front of them and then yanking it out away from them. They almost got it. Oh, almost. Not yet. They were told to stay put. And they saw this, Bill, as lying to them. Mm-hmm. And so to them, this whole thing, this whole liars contest kind of traces itself back to this idea that, well, if the Crown's going to lie to us, that we're going to make a sport of lying. And so Bill goes to the liars contest. Yeah. Liars contest. And it's an interesting idea. And I wonder how many people there understand that today, that it goes back to that. But hard to say. And
it's still there. I'm glad that it's still there, though.
So much of those little things like that around the country have those deep connections to the past, and sometimes we miss out on those. Yeah, that's unfortunate. So Britain then also decides to effect immigration in the United States, or in what will become the United States, the colonies. In 1740, they enact a system to naturalize American colonialists. So the idea here is that any Protestant alien who comes to the colonies and lives there for 7 years is deemed to be natural born. So if you're a Protestant and you live in, say, Holland or, I don't know, Norway, where do Protestants come from? Germany. You could come over here, live for 7 years, and you're now a natural born subject. But the key here is that you're a British subject. And this is the king's issue. He's okay with British subjects. He's not okay with, Americans, because Americans tend to think of themselves, while they say, well, we thought we were British, they are slowly but surely becoming not so British because, well, you know how these arguments go. And that's the problem that he faces. It's kind of the same problem we have today with immigration, isn't it? We're fine with immigrants that want to assimilate, but immigrants that don't want to assimilate, how do we feel about them? Mm-hmm. King George feels exactly the same way. He's okay with British citizens. He's not okay with people who don't want to be British.
This hour of the program brought to you by Renewal by Anderson. And all of November, which is wasting away quickly, so take advantage of this. It is their Black Friday exclusive at Renewal by Anderson. 2-year financing, 20% off all replacement windows and patio doors. You buy now with no money down, and you pay nothing till 2027. Now, terms and conditions apply. See those. Schedule your free in-home consultation also at bestwindowsflorida.com. Or you can call them at pound 250, say Best Windows. That'll connect you to Renewal by Anderson, and you get a one-time option for an auto-dial text from iHeartMedia. These Acclaim Impact Windows and Doors bring you great things. Number one, they're made of Fibrex, so they're durable, twice as strong as vinyl. They are hurricane rated to your zip code. They reduce noise in your home because of the insulation value they have, and because of that, they also are energy efficient, keeping your indoor temperature in and the outdoor temperature out. It's peace of mind you get with Acclaim Impact Windows and Doors from Renewal by Anderson, engineered for the Space Coast and built for your home. BestWindowsFlorida.com or call them at pound 250. License number is CGC 1527613. So, Dave, as this is coming about, growth, it almost seems inevitable, and the Crown doing its part to try to stop it and slow it down. And I get his economic concerns. That would be, they don't have the money to do this, right?
No, and again, you kind of look at this and say, well, the king's got a point. He's seeing this as, number one, it's going to cost us money, and these people are already refusing to pay these taxes without representation, which is an important consideration. But at the same time, I don't want to give them representation, because then what happens? Their population is already doubling every 20 years. In 40 years, they're going to have more representation in Parliament than England has in Parliament. And what's going to happen then? We talked in the past about what would have happened if King George III had said, like his father or his grandfather, who moved from Hanover to London, what if he had said, well, I'm going to move the crown from London to Boston? Would it be a different world? I mean, these are considerations that were going on here. George III's advisors were concerned that non-English immigrants, these Protestant immigrants who were coming here to become citizens, to be naturalized, were expanding and diversifying the population, and they saw that as a challenge to England's political and economic power, much as we view immigration today. Mm-hmm. So in December of 1773, George III suspended that Plantation Act, and colonial naturalization of aliens was outright forbidden under any circumstance. You cannot, even if you come here, you're never going to be a citizen. At the same time, he banned royal land grants and stopped that from happening, so the crown wouldn't even give away land anymore. These are, of course, the formation of this grievance that we're talking about, endeavoring to prevent the population of these states, obstructing laws for naturalization of foreigners, and refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither. We wanted people to come here, and King George III is not allowing that to happen. We saw that as an act of tyranny. again, we got this whole discussion about tyranny. We're going to get deep into what tyranny actually means and why we saw it that way in the future. But we're seeing this as an act of tyranny. And by doing these things, endeavoring to prevent the population of these states, he is really restricting and trying to hold us in and trying to hold us from becoming, well, not just English, but a political and economic powerhouse. Colonial leaders were infuriated by this. They saw it as a removal of colonial self-rule. And here's the kicker that I don't think we often think about. They saw high levels of immigration to the United States, to America, as vital to our national security. That's not a debate we would have today, but it is an interesting historical look at the differing way that we saw the same issue 250 years ago.
That's very true. Something I've learned in this morning is that Ben Franklin was also a heck of a politician.
Yes, he was.
That's phenomenal. And we're back with more Dave Does History in moments on WMMB.
There's no time like the present. Call Bill now at 321-768-1240.
Renewal by Anderson, this hour's sponsor of the program. Nice to have you along with us as we wrap up Tuesday on Bill Mick Live, our final segment of Dave Does History for the day. We'll get to your calls a little bit later in the segment as we take a look at what would become my native land's part in crafting the Declaration of Independence. And, well, you know, the state motto back home is Montana Semper Liberi, which is mountaineers are always free. And now we know why, because that ticked us off.
Well, and it's not just West Virginia and Kentucky and Pennsylvania, and it's everything that will eventually become the continental United States, and indeed even Hawaii and Alaska. Mm-hmm. This idea of being able to expand has always been important to us because we see it that way. Richard Henry Lee, who was, by the way, a pretty big land speculator, was furious about the Quebec Act. He called it the worst grievance we've ever suffered from the king. Historians tend to view the taxes and the British frontier policy and immigration policy as, quote, two faces of the same problem. Parliament is attempting to assert itself as the sovereign legislature for the entire empire, and they really don't know what's going on here. This leads to the frustration of the Anglo-American land speculation model, like Vandalia, and it widened the gap between the elites on both sides of the Atlantic, which, of course, would hasten the rupture of the empire. We don't have time to go through the entire history of immigration in America, but understand that it's been a pendulum swinging back and forth about whether or not we want immigration, we don't want immigration. The founders saw immigration as very important, and they had, procedures for managing it. Sometimes I wonder if we're more like the king and we don't want it at all, or if we want what the founders and framers wanted. This story of Vandalia and this grievance about the king endeavoring to prevent the population of these states, it still carries lessons for us today, especially, on a political talk show. The founders believed that a free society depended on its ability to grow, to choose who could join it, and to encourage settlement and industry without interference from distant rulers. This proposed colony of Vandalia was blocked by British policy, and it became an example of how an overreaching government can strangle opportunity before it even begins. One lesson from this is that immigration is healthiest when it serves the nation's needs, its security, and its cultural stability. The grievance was not that the king had limited immigration, it was that he did so just arbitrarily, blocking even productive settlers who wanted to build farms and towns and future colonies and states.
They didn't have H-1B visas?
No.
Okay.
The founders believed that a nation ought to decide its own population policy, and that such a policy should strengthen the country rather than weaken it. It's interesting because we're already thinking of ourselves as our own nation. Mm-hmm. Today, we draw parallels when we argue that a sovereign nation must be able to control its borders, reward those who come legally, and ensure that immigration supports national unity instead of undermining it. That's exactly what the king would have said. He didn't want people coming here that were going to become, hostile to the crown. The second lesson is that government power should never smother the aspirations of its own people. Boy, could we open some cans of worms with that one. How many times does our government tell us what we can't do? Vandalia kind of symbolized the American desire to expand, to build, to govern locally. But British restrictions showed how distant authority can block development, limit access to land, slow economic growth. Today we see that echoed in heavy federal regulation, bureaucratic overreach, decisions made far from the communities that will have to actually live with the consequences. And Vandalia is a reminder that prosperity grows from freedom, not from top-down control. The final lesson is that cultural continuity matters. The founders wanted settlers who would embrace the ideas of liberty as they understood them. They believed that immigration should reinforce, not reshape, the political culture they were building. The grievance in the Declaration, as Jefferson writes it, reveals a desire to attract people who shared a commitment to liberty, prosperity, and self-government. From our viewpoint, this is a warning about allowing large-scale immigration that does not integrate or that arrives faster than a society can possibly absorb it. In short, Vandalia teaches us that free settlers flourish when government steps back, borders are managed by the nation itself, and newcomers embrace the existing civic culture, and opportunity is allowed to spread into new frontiers. The founders understood that a nation grows strongest when it grows deliberately, responsibly, and with its own principles at the core.
And we pick it up in 60 seconds here on Bill Mick Live. Scant days left in the 2025 hurricane season. Operation Stormwatch still there for you at BillMick.com. Brought to you all season long by Solar Source. Dave, so much of what this says to us today, I'm grateful that I still hear from my friends and family in West Virginia that echo these ideas when you talk to them, when they talk about things going on in the country. It's like they've preserved a lot of this in their collective memory, and that's a great thing.
Yeah, as I travel around the country, as I have traveled around the country, it's interesting to me to see how much tradition is based in history, and I hope we never lose that. I mean, there are places I like to go that, it's all about the past, and but you wonder sometimes if we lost that. And in the same way, we have these arguments today about immigration, but do we really understand, the ideas? If we really looked at it seriously and we said, okay, I'm against immigration, well, that's really no different than King George III was. The people who founded this country and the people who framed our Constitution were not against immigration, but they were for proper immigration, and they were for, controlled and making it, having a goal in mind, as opposed to just opening things up. And we never have those discussions. We never discuss this issue from a historical viewpoint. We always discuss it from a political standpoint, which I guess is one of the hazards of living in the 21st century.
Bringing the history into it is important, and it lays the foundation for what it should be, and I like that. You want in here, it's 321-768-1240. Let's get our first call in. Line 1, you're up on Bill Mick Live. Good morning.
Hey, Bill, it's Joel from Satellite Beach.
Yeah, Joel, what's up, buddy?
In what you're discussing, you guys talked about Ben Franklin, and you said Ben Franklin's a good politician, was a great politician. No, he was a great statesman. There's a difference between a statesman and a politician. Politician is somebody who's skilled. They're usually a respected leader, but to boil it down, they put the state first sometimes and oftentimes at a disadvantage to themselves. But it's state over party, state over a political gain. Politician wants power. He wants to he puts himself above the state. And you can tell this by what's being said in today's world. They talk about the Democratic Party does this for you, the Republican Party doesn't. The Republican Party does this for you, the Democrats don't. There's only a few instances where it looks like there's a long-term goal and a person is doing things at a great disadvantage to himself.
Well, Joel, I appreciate that. I'm the one who made the comment, and I'll tell you what I meant by it, is that he out-politic Mr. Wills Hill, the Earl of Hillsborough, to overthrow his restrictions that he was wanting to place on this as far as the land goes. So it was about he played the game better than the other guy did, and he did it well.
If you look at a statesman is a great politician and a respected politician. You can be a statesman and a politician, but if you're a politician, you can't be a statesman.
Interesting perspective, Joel. Glad you shared it with us. You want in just that easy, 321-768-1240. Dave, how easy would it be? And with what you put together here today, what you put together every week for Dave Does History, it seems rather easy to take these principles and these ideas and apply them to life today and go back to what they would call in a Supreme Court hearing, original intent, right? Let's follow that, and we're going to be in really good shape here.
Well, I certainly would agree with that. I think that part of the problem is that we don't, as a society, I'm not talking about me or you in particular, but as we, the people, we don't want to do that. Why is it that we don't know these things? Because somehow or another they've been left out of our education process.
Mm-hmm.
Was that intentional or was that accidental? Was it simply neglect or was it manipulation? The ideas that we're not being taught are critical in these ideas and these processes, but they've also left us in a position now where, much as Senator Mark Kelly, it's all about myself politics rather than what's best for the country. What's best for this country is to have controlled and valid immigration processes, and I don't think anybody would disagree with that. But we've managed to foobar that because there were political advantages to doing so. And the arguments that we've made against that aren't necessarily, I've not heard any of these arguments rooted in this is the foundational document. And even if you do try to do that, Bill, what do you get hit with? Oh, that was written by a bunch of old white guys who are dead, who, own slaves, and therefore nothing that they have to say is valid.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that doesn't invalidate what they were saying. And
you noted as we started this out, they knew they were flawed people. The big fight around all of this was slavery, and they knew it was coming to an end at some point.
Especially if you listen to Ken Burns. I mean, yes, they knew that. And as Jefferson himself said, I don't know what to do about it. Nobody in 1776 did know what to do about it. Nobody knew what to do about it in 1860. The bottom line is there's this mindset today that somehow or another we were smarter than they were, and we would have solved it. I get that all the time. Well, if I'd have been there, it would have been different. No, it wouldn't have. You didn't have a solution. Nobody did. But
I think that's part of when you were talking about what gets lost from why did we lose this along the way in education. I think it's we put a false sense of importance on more recent history rather than go back further and understand the foundational principles that were in play.
And you see this all across the board, this idea that even Columbus proved that the world was round. No, everybody knew that the world was round. That was a Victorian invention to make themselves feel smarter. We pretend that we knew better, that we know better today, and we don't. And so, therefore, we neutralize or we ignore the past because we don't want to learn from it, which, of course, Ovid, the Roman poet, would have been furious about because he once said, it's right to learn even from people you don't like.
That makes sense. It really does.
It does. But where we're at today, I don't know that it can be solved. I just don't. I wish I could. All I can do is tell you what happened, and maybe we can start applying it. The next time you're in one of these discussions or debates about this stuff, remember the past.
And we learn about it as we do every Tuesday with Dave Does History. Dave, quick thoughts of next week?
Oh, I haven't even looked yet.
Okay, we'll figure it out then. Renewal by Anderson brought you this hour. Stu and Pat take over for Glenn next hour through the noon hour, or up till the noon hour. And I'll see you in the morning for a wide open Wednesday here on Bill Mick Live. Dave Bowman, thank you. We'll talk to you Tuesday.
See you then.
All right.